Hey folks, Zach Osterman here, Insider Indianapolis Star on, Saturday night, March 1st, 2025, talking to you about Indiana 78, Washington 62. Did the Insider video for IndyStar.com. Head over there for all our coverage from Indiana, Washington. Obviously, I'm not there. Mike Neislick made the West Coast trip for us. He'll be at Oregon on Tuesday night as well. Wanted to do a slightly longer video for the YouTube channel just to kind of talk a little bit, maybe less about the game. We'll talk, forgive me, my kids are yelling, it's bedtime. Outside the door, and God knows what kind of resistance they're putting up. But talk a little bit about the game, but talk more about the bigger picture for Indiana, because I think it is interesting, and this is what I'm going to write on tonight about sort of the feeling that for the first time in a while, Indiana has, I think, opportunity rather than urgency in front of it here in the next sort of 7 days or so. On the game itself, Indiana just kind of did what it needed to do. Washington is probably the worst team in the Big Ten, quite frankly. The record certainly suggests that, and Indiana just kind of didn't mess around with that. But I think it's worth saying, if you look at Washington's, home results this season in the conference, I mean, they've lost some home games by double digits. This is actually their largest margin of defeat at home in conference play, so basically in general, since USC beat them by 24 back on December 7th. They have lost a bunch of games at home, but they've lost them close. They've lost to Illinois by 4. They lost to, I guess this matches, if you want to see it this way, Michigan beat them by 16 there back on January 12th. But it's nobody's beaten them by more than this since December 7th. They lost to Purdue by 11 in a game that they threatened to make interesting for a while. They only lost to UCLA by 5. They only lost to Rutgers by 4 in overtime. That they have been more competitive than really they were. And I think anybody who watched the game, Indiana led for more than 37 minutes at one point. I mean, Indiana was up 14 at half. At one point in the second half, Indiana led by 21. I think anyone who watched the game felt like, generally speaking, when a lot of this game was dictated by Indiana. When Indiana wasn't playing well, got into some weird lineups or got into some lulls, Washington got back into it, but you never really felt like Washington was forcing the action or in control of the game in any meaningful way. 4 Hoosiers scoring double figures. Luke Goody was outstanding. 18 points, 5 made threes. Mackenzie Mbako, it felt like a quiet night for him, but he still had 10 points and 4 rebounds. Miles Rice had 10 off the bench plus 5 rebounds, which was helpful for a guard. Malik Renew, I thought, was the pick of the bunch. 22 points on 10 of 13 shooting with 6 rebounds off the bench. I mean, Washington just kind of could not figure him out, frankly. Could not figure out any way to take him out of his stride, to knock his poise, to knock his confidence. And I thought Trey Galloway and Anthony Leal deserve a special mention. Leal didn't score, but he had 4 points and 4 assists, and I don't think it's by accident at all that he had the highest plus-minus on the team at 26. I mean, what he has become for this team defensively, and in terms of the way he just kind of keeps everyone on the floor composed, cannot be understated. And then Trey Galloway, only 8 points on 12 shots, missed all 5 threes, but 7 assists to 1 turnover. Again, you felt like another one of those games, not unlike some of the ones we saw at the back end of last season when Indiana found a little bit of a rhythm, where you could just tell there was a tangible difference when Trey Galloway was on the floor in the way his team played, and its poise, and its composure, and obviously its success as well. I just think, in terms of this performance in this game, Indiana probably could have won it by a couple more baskets, but ultimately, if you're Indiana, what you needed more than anything was to get out of this game with a really, really comfortable victory, and Indiana did that, with a broadly minimum of fuss. And that leads on to the bigger picture, which is Indiana's kind of created some opportunity for itself here for the first time in a while. The Hoosiers, this game in itself is not going to do a lot for Indiana, but, on Saturday afternoon, Arkansas got blown out by South Carolina. That's an ugly loss this time of year. Nebraska lost at home to Minnesota in a game that at one point I think Minnesota led by about 20, 21 points. That's a horrible loss this time of year. Oklahoma couldn't pull an upset at Ole Miss. one of the reminders, one of the things you have to remember sometimes when you're on a bubble is um, it's not just about, sort of, can you get a high quality win? Can you get a statement win? Sometimes it's just about sort of staying steady when other teams trip up, because when you're on the bubble, other teams will trip up. I'm not sure why the light suddenly changed on the video here. Forgive me. But when you're on the bubble, other teams will make mistakes. They will have moments when the lights get too bright or whatever it is. And I think Indiana at least needed a split of this West Coast trip plus beating Ohio State on senior day to feel good about its NCAA tournament situation. But I think that the other thing Indiana really, if not needed, then I think, for the first time in a while, we can talk about this team and feel like we're talking about maybe this team, dealing almost from a position of strength. What Indiana, I think, needed was to create the opportunity for itself, beat Washington well, improve your metrics a little bit, let those things kind of wash themselves out, or let some of the ugly defeats from earlier in the season wash out a little bit. I mean, listen, 16-point win on the road in conference play against a KenPom Top 100 team is not a bad loss ever, no matter your situation. And now Indiana's guaranteed itself at least a split of the West Coast swing. It has given itself, obviously, the momentum of having won 3 in a row and 4 or 5 going into Oregon. And it creates a situation where Oregon in particular is a lot more opportunity than need. Indiana can afford to lose the Oregon game, go home and beat Ohio State, and probably at least get its, play its way to Dayton, maybe with a, depending on the ceiling, depending upon what sort of Indiana does in Indianapolis at the Big Ten tournament. But you go to Eugene on Tuesday night, and Indiana won't come home, as you would imagine. This will just be one, continuous West Coast trip. You go to Eugene on Tuesday night and beat an Oregon team that is, is very good this season. Don't underrate them. But it's an Oregon team that, it's worth saying, gave up 109 points to Illinois at home, lost to Purdue at home, lost to Nebraska at home, lost to Minnesota on the road, lost to UCLA at home. Oregon is not unbeatable in Eugene. And if you win that game, that's, I think, a 4th quad 1 road win, if I'm not mistaken. I am trying to do something about this lighting for you. I don't know why the camera keeps fading in and out. Forgive me. But I think that's a 4th quad 1 road win for Indiana. It's a 3rd quad 1 win in the last however many weeks, going back to the Michigan State game. I guess that was on February 11th, so basically the last about 3 weeks. It's a 3rd quad 1 road win, or quad 1 win period in 3 weeks against an NCAA tournament team. And it's the kind of win that at this time of year, given Indiana's other metrics, given that Indiana has no quad 3 or 4 losses, or even at this point quad 2 losses, given that Indiana has some genuine road wins that are going to hold up, given that Indiana's beaten some other bubble teams, primarily Ohio State, and that's a big game at home for its own reasons, but we'll leave that for next week because obviously that game's still, a week out, being March 8th and back in Bloomington. You beat Oregon, and you start talking about Indiana not even having to worry about Dayton, which, of course, Indiana fans will know well is important because Indiana fans saw how difficult it was for their team to navigate a late game at Dayton on a Tuesday night, fly overnight, essentially, across the country to Portland, and then have to play Thursday early afternoon in Portland. And, listen, Indiana, would Indiana get handed a trip like that again? I mean, Seattle's possible, but also, I've seen some projections for Providence. I think I might have seen one for Indiana going to Raleigh from Dayton. So that's not quite as, sort of oppressive, I guess, of a trip out of Dayton. But if you can avoid that game, you just want to. And I think for the first time in a while, Indiana is operating from a position of sort of possibility or opportunity rather than urgency and need, because it's given itself the leeway to go to Oregon and feel like a loss is okay, but a win would mean the world. And it that sort of feels a little bit now like kind of the new pivot point of Indiana season. Purdue, Michigan State felt that way a little bit. Ohio State back in January felt that way. Michigan and Michigan State felt that way. Purdue felt that way. Now Oregon feels that way. And that's just kind of that is the nature of seasons as they develop when you still have things to play for in March. And through all of its struggles and all of its difficulties, Indiana absolutely has that. So we'll leave it there for now. I'll have an insider, as you would imagine, at indystar.com later tonight. Of course, Mike Neislick will have um, dispatches from out on the West Coast as well. But just to close with this, to give you an idea for what the Washington win, and Washington is 103 in KenPom. So this was not this is with KenPom's updated numbers after the final horn. Washington has dropped out of the KenPom top 100. That really doesn't matter a lot. They are likely to stay comfortably within the net quad 2 range for Indiana as a road win. But the loss drops Washington out of the KenPom top 100. But because of the way Indiana wins, Indiana goes from 52 in KenPom up to 47. This is the first time Indiana's been ranked higher than 50th in KenPom since the Nebraska loss on December 13th. So that gives you an idea of suddenly maybe Indiana's numbers climbing a little bit. And again, Indiana creating opportunity for itself rather than urgency, rather than need. So we'll be back soon. It's a pretty quick turnaround to Oregon, but for the Indianapolis Star, I'm Zach Osterman. Sorry about the video quality on this. I don't know what the deal is with the lighting behind me, but I'll get it fixed for the next one. We'll talk to you soon.